Like, but everybody says this is the job. Everybody says this is so glamorous. When I tell people what I do, they're like, I can't believe it. You have a dream job. And I was like, why doesn't it feel like a dream job to me? And I am, before this, unfamiliar with Heartfulness. So I come in really knowing nothing other than I'm a seeker.
In this confluence of science and spirituality, what often gets talked about is psychedelics.
Real appeal of spiritual practice is it's not the fast track. Well, what is purpose and how would I know? And also just trusting that feeling. And I like this. I like to live in a world that has some mystery and some magic.
Woof woof. Welcome to Kanha.
Today I'm speaking to Shanti Cohen, who is a writer, podcaster, and NBC-HWC certified coach. Shanti has been working as a journalist for over 20 years and has worked with the Associated Press, covering entertainment and music. She hosts the Inner Peace to Go podcast and is working on her first book.
Sandy, it's so wonderful that you could take out time and come to the Kanha Studio. It's wonderful to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing this.
I'm thrilled.
So first, let me ask you, this is your first visit to Kanha, Shanti, Vanam. What's it been like? What do you think of the campus?
I think it's incredible. I can't believe that 6 years ago there was nothing here, and now it's this thriving neighborhood. I mean, it's a neighborhood. It's a community. I had no idea what to expect, but this still exceeded my expectations.
Wow. Well, and also in your time here, you've had the chance to interview Daaji twice.
Yes.
What was that like? What was meeting Daaji like?
Well, it was wonderful. So we did 2 interviews, and the first one was at his home. And so I was nervous. And then I saw the interview set up, and it was set up kind of like a talk show. Mm-hmm. And so I write for what used to be print and is now the internet. And normally it's just me and the subject and I have a tape recorder. So this was all like set up and lights and cameras. And then I was really nervous. And plus there was like an audience. I really felt like I'm Oprah and like he's on my show. So I was a little intimidated because of the setup, but he's so warm and lovely. And I had read his book, so I felt like I was informed, and I had been here already a few days. So I felt like, I wasn't coming from total left field, but it was wonderful to talk to him. And then last night we had a second meeting, and this is where I felt like we really connected. This one was in his office, so it felt a little less like a talk show. And I couldn't see the people that were watching the interview, so I was less intimidated. But I also felt like we really connected. My questions were a little more open-ended. They weren't specific to the book, so I felt like we really connected also because I mentioned to him that my father was a pharmacist, and of course he has, in his past as a pharmacist. So it felt very warm and very lovely. And of course, an honor to be able to have his time like that twice. And so, yeah, it was a complete delight.
Wow. And the book, of course, you were talking about was Spiritual Anatomy.
Yes.
Which you read.
Yes.
And what are your thoughts on that book?
Well, I felt like it, and he and I talked about this, it's like a roadmap. You don't have to know how you're going to get where you're going because he lays it all out. And I felt like that made it very practical. And I am, before this, unfamiliar with Heartfulness. So I come in really knowing nothing other than I'm a seeker. And so this was like step by step. And it's almost kind of hard to believe that like, oh, okay, it could be this simple. And when we spoke, he was saying it's this simple. It's not esoteric, and it's not only for, some rare person who can live in the Himalayas. Like this is something anybody could do. And he even made the point, he made it again last night, that this is for when you have an ordinary, normal life. This isn't like for an ascetic or, you have to renounce all your worldly possessions. This is something practical. So I felt that when I read the book, and then I felt that he embodies that for people to learn it.
Because what you mentioned is very right. We often think of terms like chakras, and immediately we think that this is too esoteric and this is too new agey, and it's just complicated. But did you get a familiarity with all these concepts by reading Spiritual Anatomy?
Yes. I mean, some of it I well, I had heard of chakras before because we
Of
have this
course.
concept of the chakras, but I hadn't known about this kind of positioning of the chakras. That was completely unfamiliar. And the idea of expanding consciousness, I was like aware of and intrigued by, but I hadn't seen it presented as such a not totally linear, but like almost like a step-by-step kind of path. Like this is something that you can actually ascend through and not just sort of hope that this happens, like you can do it. It's laid out for you. And that's what I think I was most taken by with the book.
Yeah, it's almost like a manual that you do this and this is what will happen kind of thing. It's not like there are not that many variables that you rely on the universe to come to your rescue.
Right. And he tells you kind of what to expect at each thing. Like, here's
Sure.
where you could get hung up, and here's what you can sort of look forward to. And here's where people are like reluctant to move forward because they reach that. So that I found very reassuring. And it seems like it's actually accessible.
So I wanted to ask you, Sandy, when did your interest in wellness and you said you were familiar with the concept of chakras as well. So you've been exploring, obviously, this field. How did it start? Is it something that you've been interested in since childhood or something that's come up later?
No, it's come up later. I think it started because I had such a stressful job when I was working as a journalist covering entertainment in Los Angeles. So it's very, of course, glitzy and glam, but
Of
also
course.
high pressure and around the clock. And something inside me was like, oh, I don't actually think this is for me. But also the intoxicating nature of that kind of job made it hard to leave.
Of course.
Like, oh, but I have access to all this stuff and I meet all these famous people. And, but my heart kept saying, yeah, but this isn't for you. So I think that's what really stimulated my interest in, well, what is purpose and how would I know? And also just trusting that feeling. Like, but everybody says this is the job. Everybody says this is so glamorous. When I tell people what I do, they're like, I can't believe it. You have a dream job. And I was like, why doesn't it feel like a dream job to me? It doesn't feel like a dream job to me. So I think that's when I really got serious about not only spiritual seeking, but wellness in general, like looking after my mental health, being sure to get enough sleep, don't drink so much, like all the sort of vices that I had developed to deal with the stressful occupation. That's when I started to see this is not helping. And these are clues that this maybe isn't for me if you're trying to fix it with all these intoxicants.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you mentioned it's hard to get out of that entire celebrity culture, actually. And popular culture today is largely celebrity driven. We also have influencers now where, so it's a very intoxicating world. How would you, for someone who's in the thick of it and who's been in the thick of it, how would you tell someone who's doing it now how to figure out whether it's right for them or not?
I think that's really hard. I think that for me, I was so raised to believe that like you do well in school so that you can go to a really good college, so you can get a really good job, and then you will be happy. And so for me, this was like a really good job. But where's the happy? Like that was the main clue. So I think it's difficult to trust ourselves over what we've been taught. No, but you did all the right things. You went to a good university. You got this great job. Like you should be happy. And then to listen to yourself and say, yeah, but if I ask my deepest self, I'm just not happy. I know it seems like I should be. I have everything that looks like I should be happy, but I know. So I don't know how to tell someone you have to really just trust your innermost self. Like I remember this one time I called my dad and I was like, Dad, I'm wasting my life. I said this on the phone to my dad.
Whoa.
I'm standing on Melrose Avenue. And I said, Dad, I'm wasting my life. Like my life is going in the wrong direction. But if you would look at my life on paper, you would say, she's doing awesome. She has working for the biggest news agency in the world. She's interviewing all the most fabulous people. So I think you really have to listen to your deepest heart. And I think it takes courage to do that.
Sure,
because
sure.
all the messages of society are not that. And
There's also a security in staying in where you are. There's such a security, and you taking a leap out of it is not easy.
100%. And I mean, plus that was my job. Like that's how I made money to live, to pay my rent and like pay for my car and everything. So so I saved for a year. So I would advise anyone who's in the thick of it and wants to get out, start saving so that you can build like a small safety net for yourself. Because for me,
Absolutely.
it took a couple of years to really figure out my new direction and figure out what I was going to do.
Absolutely. In India, the fact that we had joint families not too long back gave you a kind of security net to also explore. Now, even in India, it's nuclear families everywhere. But earlier, you had joint families and a big support system kind of thing where, everybody kind of looked out for you. So even if you had to take time out and figure stuff out, you could do that. But I think in today's world, it's getting more and more difficult to do that and figure it out. I was listening to Robert Greene, and he talks about something, in your childhood, you get clues of what is your direction in life. You get clues, but over time, we kind of cover it up with there's pressure from peers, there's, what we think of our definition of success, the people we are around, how they define success. And so that voice somehow gets lost somewhere. Looking back to your childhood, did you find any such clues that showed you would be in this direction of finding yourself in wellness?
I didn't know about finding myself in wellness, but I did know about writing.
Really?
I've known since I was little
Wow.
that I wanted to write. I used to make, like as a kid, I can remember it. I wonder if my mom still has them. I used to draw little magazines for my mom, and I would write an article that was one sentence or something, but like in a little magazine. So I always wanted to write. I have always loved to read. And so it's been wonderful knowing that that's been my path. And even though I know that, I still sometimes have doubts. But I think that's also why when I got that big job with the big news agency, that I felt like, okay, this is it. Like, I'm going to retire from this place. This is it for the rest of my life. And that made it even harder to be like, oh, what if this is not it? But yes, writing. So
language and words have been
Yes.
kind of your calling.
Yes.
Wow. Let me ask you about the celebrity life, because everyone is enamored of it. Everyone thinks it's like such a cushy ride, and meeting all these people, it must be so. So you must have met loads of people and loads of celebrities, because it's 20 years, if I'm not mistaken.
I did it for about 15 years.
Wow.
And yes, I met like almost all of them. I mean, not the ones in the last 5 years, right? Because
Sure.
I had left that
Sure.
job. But it like when I say it's intoxicating, it is. You're in this environment with all these gorgeous people, and we would have to be dressed up as well. So like we're trying to look our best. We're, not as gorgeous, but we're looking our best. And so you're in this environment, and then everything is free. It's like free
course.
drinks and free food. And when you leave, here's a free gift bag. And you're in these exclusive environments, like going to the Golden Globe Awards, going to the Oscars. You can't believe, for me, I couldn't believe I was there. It's like, what am I doing here? Like, this is awesome. So it is, I see why people want to be in that.
Mhm.
What I would say is the downside, I can't speak for the celebrity perspective because I'm not that, but for people who work around celebrities, you really are on call all the time. If news broke, like if a celebrity, in my position, if a celebrity was arrested or was ill and hospitalized or whatever, anything that happened to celebrities, I would be called. I would get a phone call and I would have to work.
Of course.
And that can interfere with one's life. And yet I'm a hard worker, so I would always like say yes and then work. So I think that's also true for the people who are surrounding the celebrities, like the publicists. So if your client gets arrested, the publicist needs to immediately
Sure.
start working around like the image. Or we would get a phone call. I remember I was at my parents' house on the weekend and got a phone call that a celebrity had died. And it was, a weekend and I was away, so I didn't have my computer. And then that became a whole thing like, okay, well, how am I going to write this story? I don't have my computer and I got to call somebody. And so the machinations around that world are very time consuming and demanding. That being said, it's glittery and glamorous when you're there. It's wonderful to be able to walk by and be like, oh my God, there's Angelina Jolie, or Oprah. I was like standing next to Oprah. Why am I standing next to Oprah? And I'm like standing next to Oprah. So there's those kind of moments. And I'm really glad I got to have that experience. And yet I'm also glad I'm not still doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So a lot of us on the outside, when we look at the celebrity world, we think of a world of excess, where, everything is larger than life, bigger than life. It's faster, stronger, higher, whatever. So were you ever invited into that world, the kind of world of excess? Were there some experiences you had where you said, man, this is just totally over the top?
I mean, I wasn't invited in as anyone other than a journalist. So I wasn't like, oh, come on, we're partying in the rooftop or whatever. I wasn't invited in that way. But I did do some interviews in people's homes where I got to see what their homes were like. And I'll tell you, it's much, much different from what like my little home is like. So I did get to see that. And I think you see the excess when you know how much is spent on these parties and gatherings. So for instance, if there's a movie premiere, they close off a street in Hollywood or in Beverly Hills or wherever they have it. So they close off a street. That's all the police and, infrastructure to close that off. They have the movie. They show the movie. All the reporters come to take pictures and do interviews on the red carpet on the way into the movie theater. Afterwards, there's a huge party. So they've rented out some venue. They've decorated it beautifully. There's tons of food and booze. And so this is excess. I mean, I wouldn't even be able to ballpark what they spend on this, but it's like many tens of thousands of dollars.
Sure.
Every week movies come out. Multiple movies come out every week. And so this is what we're talking about. And it employs a lot of people. So in Los Angeles, we recently had a long strike of the actors and the writers that put Hollywood together. They were all on strike, 6 months, no work. And that didn't just affect those actors and writers because there's all of these people, the people who put the party together, the people who cook the food, the valets who are going to drive the cars, the costumers who are going to dress the celebrities. So it's a huge industry. So I think there's a lot of ways to look at excess. And this is what the industry, I think, demands of itself. Like, I don't know who set these standards, but this is kind of the standard. So it may not seem like excess to those who are participating, but certainly as like a normal middle-class girl, my parents are not in entertainment. Like, my mom's a teacher, my dad's a pharmacist. So seeing that, you see excess. I mean, some people could come to an event and their outfit costs $10,000.
Sure.
Their outfit.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is saying something. So as a journalist, you are, in a sense, also supposed to maintain neutrality. But is it always that easy? Because you are connecting with a person. You may feel for that person. You may, and there is stuff we read which is not said. There's readings that go on, there's connections that go on that is perhaps not overtly said, but you make a connection with somebody and you want to help out or you want to, give some advice. Is that easy as a journalist? Because it's people you're dealing with. They're celebrities, sure, but they're people at the end of the day.
And I'm a person too.
Yeah.
So we know that people are people and like you can bring objectivity, but I'm still me.
Sure.
I still have feelings about things and things I like and things I don't like, just like everybody else. Where I think it comes in is really two things. One is trying to get both sides of the story. So if we're writing about, oh, this person did this terrible thing, then let's also talk to that person. Instead of just like demonizing them, they did this horrible thing. Let's also talk to them. What's their side of the story? Maybe they didn't think it was a horrible thing, or maybe they had a good reason or whatever. So to present both sides, that kind of objectivity, that's something that you can do no matter what you personally feel, is to do your due diligence and do that research. And then I also like to keep in mind the reader and what do they need to know? Like if, for instance, say someone's kind of a jerk to me, but we're talking about their role in a film.
Yeah.
It may or may not be relevant to the reader that the person was kind of a jerk. Like, as long as they answered about the film, and I don't know, maybe this is just me, but maybe that's why publicists like me. That I wouldn't necessarily put that in unless it made itself part of the story.
Sure.
So there's a certain amount of remove. I understand that they're not dealing with me, Sandy Cohen, sensitive gal. They're dealing with the reporter who came from this organization to interview me for this thing. So, but yeah, I mean, of course, there's people who I've liked more, or I felt like I connected with more, and people who I felt like were difficult to deal with. But at the end of the day, I'm a professional, so I'm gonna do what I came to do, which is to interview you and create a story for the readers. It's not really about them. And I had a mentor early on in my career who was like, we don't write our articles for the subject of the article. If I interview you, my article's not for you. My
Sure.
article is for the readers
Sure.
to learn about you. So that has been really helpful to remember.
Sure. But since you see the state of the press today and the state of the discourse, there's a lot of what you try to avoid, a kind of a feeding frenzy where somebody is being taken down and everybody is kind of taking shots, or somebody is being put up on a pedestal and everybody is just towing the line. Do you think there is a problem right now in reporting about entertainment specifically?
I think the problem is the competitive nature in the 24-hour news cycle.
Sure.
So if we always have to come up with something new, and if I need you to read my website because then I can make more money from advertising and not read this other person's website, because I want to make that money, then there's an impetus to continue to look for new things or like, oh, people are reading this. What else can we give them on this? So I think that market-driven journalism is not the best. Should I even say this? There are some models, like for the BBC, for instance, where it's somewhat subsidized, so it doesn't have to make such a profit. I think profit-driven news sets us up for trouble.
Sure.
Because then we're not being driven by truth, we're being driven by profit. So I think that feeding frenzy that you're talking about, I understand that the structure of the system requires it, because the only way they make money is if they have viewers, clicks, whatever. And then they have to pay the reporters. Like, we don't do it for free, right? So I wish there was some other model.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to celebrity, I think there's just like an obsessiveness. Like, we just want to know, what is Taylor Swift doing and how's her relationship? And, I think that my feeling too is when I was covering this, and one of the things that made me feel like it wasn't for me was when we had the election in 2016
Sure.
and Donald Trump was elected. It made me think like it was before that. You could be up on the news, quote, air quote, and all you really knew about was like Kim Kardashian's dating this guy, and, Britney Spears is, her conservatorship ended or whatever. You could know sort of pop culture entertainment news and therefore be, quote unquote, up on the news. And that, I think, is a problem, because the role of journalism, especially in the United States where I live, is to support democracy. Like, we are there to present truths so that we can have a well-informed populace who are electing the people who run our land. And so if you are all well-versed on Kim Kardashian and Britney Spears, well, maybe you weren't well-versed on the folks that were running for office. And so I think that it's a distraction. I think that it's a very compelling distraction. These are gorgeous people and they're gazillionaires and like, who doesn't want to know about them?
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah. So do you think this distraction may be actually by design, because it's actually keeping the spotlight away from knowing your candidates, knowing who's up for office, and knowing the deeper stories that really have an impact on your life,
But designed by whom?
Yeah, that's the big question, because there's a lot of people who think that there's some sort of hidden hand. It's a conspiracy theory that the popular discourse is being guided this way.
I don't go for the conspiracy theory. I mean, I think that it's understood. We like pretty things. Human beings like pretty things. So the celebrities,
and it's all over the world, pretty
and
much.
The celebs are pretty. It's like, and it's easier to know about that. You don't have to think. You can just know that, oh, she's dating this guy and they're so cute, And when you talk about democracy and the challenges
policy.
and policy and real life issues, then you have to think about, how do I feel about it? Should these people get this or that benefit? Is there a fairer way? These are a lot more challenging thoughts to embrace. I'll tell you something. So while we've been here, we got to visit the school. And I was very moved by the visit to the school here, because one of the things they're teaching is critical thinking. And I think some of that, at least in the education system that I was raised in, has been evaporating. And if you don't have critical thinking, then of course you'd rather just eat some, like the cotton candy version of news, because otherwise it's very challenging. So I don't think it's like by design by some like deep state
Yes,
power, but I just think it's human nature. And if we're not taught to think critically, and we're not and we're not understanding like, oh, I have value in this system. Like my voice says something. I could make an impact. If we don't know that, then what is the incentive? Why not just have candy? Like what's the incentive to be informed? It's upsetting. It's upsetting to read about war. It's upsetting to, I live in an area where there's a lot of homeless, like unhoused people. Oh. And, it's upsetting to think about that. And the solution is not easy. So it's a lot easier on the brain to just like Taylor Swift, Beyonce.
Sure. It's much easier. And of course, even the deeper discussions on policy and things like that, over the last few years, in fact, the election 2016 you mentioned, they've become extremely kind of divided down the middle, where there's either you're with us or against us, and there are two sides, and they're completely different views on the same story, And that seems to be the gulf seems to be getting wider and wider. And it's not like there is one right version. There is your version and there is our version, and they are completely different. And the word fake news is bandied about from one side, tells it about the other. Do you see a way out for journalism?
I mean, it's not just journalism, it's humanity.
Absolutely.
And I think the way out is common humanity, recognizing that, like what the Heartfulness teaches or what mindfulness teaches, like seeing people around the world, we all want the same things. We want to know that our loved ones are safe and we want to be safe. We like to enjoy ourselves and eat something delicious. We like to be like in pleasant weather. Like we want to, it's not that different. So I think the solution, let's listen to me. Oh, let me tell you about the solution. I think one of the solutions is to remember or to relearn our common humanity.
Sure.
And we need to have a polite discourse. And this is not easy. Again, these things are not easy. But I think things like mindfulness, meditation, those kinds of things that reconnect us to our common humanity, that's where it has to be. Because otherwise, it's like you said, it's polarized. Everyone's demonized. Oh, it's us and them.
Sure.
But us and them is fake. There is no us and them.
Yeah.
It's just us.
Sure. Now, you dropped out of that world of celebrity and the whole reporting on celebrity and music, and then you had saved up enough to kind of start your exploration. Where did it go from there? Where did your exploration take you?
I went back to school, and
Wow.
I will be finishing my master's degree next year in 2024.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you. So I studied public health and health education. And I started to look for opportunities to write about health. I studied health coaching as well to help people like manage their thoughts and get on top of their health. How can I get more sleep? How can I reduce my stress?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been learning a lot. I've been really studying a lot. And then I started working with people who wanted me to write about wellness. So I write for UCLA and I write for Shondaland and I write about science and health and wellness. And it's awesome because I really get to interview people who are heroes to me. It's funny. I was telling my friends who I'm here with that one of my first interviews when I started writing for UCLA was with a scientist who's developed immunotherapy to treat cancer.
Wow.
So he's like literally curing cancer, this guy.
Wow.
And so I was going to interview him and I was so nervous. And I told my boss, I said, I was never this nervous to interview like George Clooney. This guy's curing cancer. So now I know I'm really in the right place.
Wow. And personally, did you explore wellness, things for yourself, exercises for yourself? What was your personal exploration like?
Oh, yes. I've like tried everything because I had depression. So I was diagnosed with depression and I took medication. And then I was like, okay, I really need to get serious about this because I was young and like I want to have good health. So my favorite thing is to be sure to get enough sleep. I really prioritized my sleep. That made a big difference. I stay away from my devices. My device does not make any noise. Well, the phone can ring, as we learned during my first interview with Daaji. But I don't get any notifications. I don't get any notifications for anything. I don't look at a ton of news. I'm on vacation right now, so I haven't looked at news at all.
Wow.
And when I get home on days that I work, I will look at the newspaper. I don't watch any television news. So I've really minimized my exposure to stressful stimuli. I meditate. I exercise. I read every night. I read 50 books last year.
Wow.
So I have changed the way I spend my time. I quit drinking. So I still have wine
Wow.
now and then, but I mean, like for the most part.
Sure.
So my wellness has, I mean, my life looks totally different. And I feel so much better. Like I feel so much more at ease and just happier, lighter.
And how is it explaining it to your peers who've been with you when you were working in the celebrity circle? How is it explaining to them that this is your new life, and this is because perhaps I'm assuming some of them are still working that circle. So
Yeah, I think that they got it. I mean, like I remember when I told my friends I'm going to leave this job, they were like, "Oh, thank God! Like, you really need to leave that job." So my good friends knew, like, yeah, that was a good move. And my friends in the industry, I think they also knew because I would talk about
Mhm.
being unsatisfied, and like I would say I want to work in healing. I remember telling a friend who works for Disney that I want to work in healing. I think my next job could be something with healing. So I think that they get it, and it's not like I'm the only one who has left. I have colleagues who left and like became a massage therapist, or like just decided to do something different. And so I think it's not super unusual. And certainly the people who knew me and cared about me were like, "Oh, good. Go do something that feels more fulfilling to you."
Wow. So the future, what do you have charted out for the future? What would you like to do going forward to take this journey? You're here at the Heartfulness Center, so it's far removed from the celebrity circles of LA. But what do you see in the future? What courses what course do you want to take?
I want to write. I just want to write
Wow.
and share what I've learned. Like you can go from being a total stress case to being like a peaceful individual and still feel professionally successful.
Mhm.
I want to tell that story. I want to write books. I want to continue to write articles. I want to interview inspiring people and help share their story. I want to explain science in simple ways. That's something I do a lot at UCLA, and I like to it's funny, I feel like I'm a processor. Like I put the science in and then like a layperson article comes out.
Oh, wow.
So I want to continue to do that.
Yeah.
So I think I'm really on the right path now. I appreciate you asking that question. Thank you.
Well, that's so amazing because what you say, taking the science in and getting something out that is readable to a layperson and understandable to a layperson, I think we need a lot more of that, because a lot of the times people just tune out of the science because they think, listen, I'm never going to get it. So
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And like a lot of this master's degree has been, reading science and making sense of science. And a lot of what I do for UCLA is the same. And even for Shondaland is the same. I'll link to the studies in my story. So if you wanted to read the actual study, but maybe you don't want to read 30 pages of science
Sure,
writing, you
sure.
could just read my little article and we'll, be the synopsis and kind of give you the nuggets that you need and more practical. Not everybody wants to read science.
Of course. And also now, since you're reading a lot of science and talking to a lot of scientists, and also talking to people who are quote unquote spiritual folks, do you see a kind of coming together? Because this has been talked about a lot, is, that spirituality and science, are they at crossroads or are they now overlapping? What do you see?
Oh, I think they're definitely overlapping. I think science is catching up.
Mhm.
I think that the spiritual truths that have been espoused over millennia, science is now advanced enough to first of all, there's enough interest among scientists, and the scientific methods that they're using have caught up, and they're able to prove the things that we've know inside. I did an interview recently with a woman who's a scientist at Columbia University in New York, and she studies the science of spirituality. She's a neuroscientist.
Wow.
So she looks at the brain, and they've identified the parts of the brain that are receptive to spirituality. So she says our brains are wired for spirituality. And just like anything, just like epigenetics, just like you could, some things get turned on and some things get turned off depending on your behavior and your environment, et cetera.
Sure.
This is true for spirituality. But even without turning anything on, we have that innate capacity. It's wired into our brain. So I was wowed by this. Like her book I read last year was one of the most important books that I read, because this is phenomenal. This is not just like belief and hope and I wish this would work, like we're wired for this. So, and I think we're seeing it too with the research on meditation and what it does to the brain. And even Daaji yesterday was telling me about The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton
Sure.
and what that shows about human development and environment and stress levels. So I think that we're definitely seeing that intersection. And I guess it depends on how you define spirituality. But if we want to talk about sort of cognitive capacity and beyond, I think that we're really seeing scientific support for the kinds of spiritual truths that have long been shared.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the two common things that you find in science and spirituality is that when you speak to people in either field, there's stuff that blows your mind.
Yes.
So,
yes.
have you had those conversations with?
That was like this Dr. Miller who I talked to from Columbia, and she was saying that this is innate and that we can see where in the brain it is. And another woman who I interviewed, she's a Harvard psychologist, Ellen Langer. She's been studying mindfulness for 40 years. They did a study where they found out that they had people meditate in a room and then leave, and another room that was just a regular room. Nobody was in there, People who went into the like where people had been meditating had different measurements, than the room that had been empty. Like, that is wild. They could feel it, even though both rooms were now empty. But when you walked into the meditation room, and I don't know what metrics they were using, but like when you walked into the room that people had been meditating in, your metrics, totally uninvolved in the meditation, not knowing which room was which, were different. And that is mind-blowing. And I'm so glad scientists are doing this work.
Absolutely.
Because it just validates these things that were, like, as we said, esoteric, right? Like, I'm not sure. And this.
In fact, I think scientists wouldn't even dabble in this, say, like 30, 40 years ago, just thinking because it would be considered too out there and too weird to kind of not scientifically respectable.
Right.
Kind of thing.
100%. And they're actually, scientists have said that, sort of like the scientific elders now, like maybe people who are retiring now, have said that they were discouraged. Psychologists and psychiatrists were discouraged from pursuing studies into like meditation or mindfulness because it was like too weird, too far out. You're going to diminish your academic respectability if you do this.
That's so interesting. Now, let me ask you something a wee bit controversial, because there's in this confluence of science and spirituality, what often gets talked about is psychedelics. I mean, it's like, we don't seem to know enough yet to make an informed opinion. Where do you, in your conversations with people, where do you think we are with psychedelics? Because they have been used to treat PTSD and depression, but on the other side, they have been abused as well.
Yes. All right. I'm so glad you asked this, because I've just been writing about this. So I've just talked to scientists about this very recently. So for PTSD in the United States, they're about to review and potentially approve MDMA, like ecstasy, what we would call ecstasy, for PTSD. And legitimate scientists have studied this. They're in what's like called a phase 3 trial. So that means that this is their third round with the subjects. And what they found is the people who receive counseling as well as this medication, something like 70% of them are no longer diagnosed with PTSD.
Wow.
Yes. And they have, and they tolerate it well. Like, they're not getting sick or feeling weird or whatever. So this is tremendously promising, because the treatments that currently exist for PTSD are nowhere near that effective, nowhere near. So that study is just completed in September, and it's supposed to be looked at in the new year by the Food and Drug Administration, who approves drugs in the United States. So I think this is really promising. I think you're right when it comes to like, what can psilocybin do? What can LSD do? I think we don't know. And part of the reason we don't know, at least in the United States, is that these drugs are Schedule I drugs. So that means they have no according to the government, they have no medicinal value. They're very difficult to study. And so only now are they beginning to do larger studies, because obviously you need a large enough study to see if people get messed up from this or if it's helpful or what, right? You need to know, are people going to get sick or harmed by this? And you can't decide that based on 6 people or whatever, or 10 people. So it's just beginning, this kind of research that I hope will be very promising. I mean, some of the doctors have said that like this could be the key, because right now the treatments we have for depression, it's like 30% effective or 40% effective. Like many people who take drugs for depression don't feel any better. So,
and then there's the addiction problem to antidepressants as well.
And if you stay on them forever and you can never get off of them, and what they're finding. So I just recently wrote about this. There was a study, it was very small. I think it was 20 people, but they had either one treatment or two treatments with psilocybin plus counseling, and their symptoms dropped by more than half. Like their symptoms dropped by more than anything that we currently offer, and persisted feeling well like that for the 3 months of the study.
Wow.
So it's very promising, but we need to know, okay, does it wear off on 3 months and 1 day? Like we need to, and how about if we had a larger sample, if we had, 1,000 people instead of just 20 people? But I think it's worth exploring.
Absolutely.
And especially if you do it with a doctor. I mean, they're not saying, I remember this one doctor who I interviewed, and he had done research in the 60s, like in the early phases of psychedelics before they were classified as Schedule 1 in the United States. And he said, this is not about just like take mushrooms, hope for a mystical experience, and now all your problems are solved. It's more complex than that. It requires the counseling during which they help you process what you experience. So if you had some weird visions or you felt lost or whatever, then they're going to help you process that so that it makes sense for your life. It's not just like, woohoo, I felt so weird and like now I'm fine, It's deeper than that. So I do think that kind of gets lost in the discussion.
Sure.
It's not like, oh, just take ecstasy at home and cure your depression. It's medically supervised, and it includes the counseling.
It's interesting because in the Native American cultures in South America also, they have a shaman that is actually supervising the ayahuasca treatment. It's not like you just go ahead and
take it in the forest and just do whatever. Exactly. And then you have somebody who knows. I mean, and in those cultures, it wouldn't have persisted if it wasn't working, right? So they have evidence that it works, but this is one of those, it's just in that culture, and we, like American scientists, don't have the data. But yes, you want to do it with someone who's looking out for you. You don't want to have anything weird and now you're trying to drive. Or, you know what I mean? Like it needs to be done safely.
Yeah, driving down the Rainbow Road.
Right. This is so fun,
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, something that's recently been in the news, I mean, there were congressional hearings for it, is the UFOs. Now they call them something else. They call them the UAVs, I think. It's like something that's suddenly come up and it's like being acknowledged, and there are people from the Air Force and the Army testifying about these things. Where do you think that's going? Have you had any interviews with people?
No, that's like out of my realm of reporting. But I think it's interesting because what it tells me is that we don't know everything. I think a lot of times, especially even as a science head myself, like we want to, here's the evidence. We know this works, but we don't know everything. And we don't know what those things were. And even the government maybe doesn't know, or they're definitely like not telling us. So I think that, and I like this, I like to live in a world that has some mystery and some magic. And I also don't think we like have to know everything. I guess if we're going to be in danger, maybe I'm going to regret saying that. But I think that, we don't know everything. That there's more to learn.
Absolutely. There's such a, there's a very funny story about psychedelics. You're familiar with Ramdas?
Yes.
Have you read the story of him going into the Himalayas, finding his guru, of course?
Yes,
And he was carrying his LSD with him. And one day, and he used to have a very high dosage of LSD because he'd been doing it for a long time, right? From his days in Harvard. And he one tablet of his LSD, I'm forgetting the exact, but he said it was strong enough to kill a horse, and he would have half of those.
Yeah.
And he had about 7 or 8 pills left, and his Guruji, Baba Neem Karoli, very well, revered in India, and particularly in the hills. He said, "What's the medicine you have? Can you get it to me?" So he said, "What medicine?" He says, the one that you say is, gives you experiences. So he got him this bottle which had 8 pills. So, and he just took it out and popped all 8. And Ramdas was like, "Okay, now I've done it, and there's going to be, this is over, obviously."
Killed the guy, right?
And that evening, Guruji looked at him and said, "Your medicine is good, but it's temporary." So it's interesting. I wonder how much there is to know out there,
Right. Exactly. And maybe we're just barely scratching the surface. And I think that's part of the appeal of psychedelics is like, can I get a fast track to glimpse that? Mm-hmm. But I think the real appeal of spiritual practice is it's not the fast track, but then you could stay there longer.
Yeah, you can get it to last.
Yes.
So speaking about that, have you had an experience of heartfulness meditation as well?
Yes. I had beautiful. Oh, now I forgot her name.
Dashwinder?
Darshvinder, yes. I'm like, oh my God, I've been like so careful knowing her name. Yes, Darshvinder was with me and led me through several sessions. We went to group meditation today and yesterday in the big hall. So yes, it's been wonderful.
What was that like? Did you?
Well, on the one with Darshvinder, the third one, it might have been the third or the fourth, I lost my body. Like I was really, really there. And I never had that before. I've been practicing mindfulness just on my own. And I never had something like that. And I told her, I was like, oh, it was weird. Like I couldn't, I didn't feel my body. And she goes, I felt that. Like she could tell that I was having that experience.
Wow.
So it was super cool.
It's something that we all think about as we get older. And certainly you have dealt with celebrities, so you know how they that world tries to value youth above anything else. They try and look young and stay young by whatever means possible, chemicals, whatever. But do you think that getting older, thoughts about mortality also creep in? Is your understanding of what life is all about, what is important in life, has changed?
Yes. I think that things become a little more like, I don't know if it's a little more clear. Yeah, a little more clear, a little more obvious. Like, I think about this a lot because I'm right at that age where I'm really aware that, oh yeah, this doesn't last forever. I won't be here forever.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Some of us buy a fancy car to get over those feelings.
Right, exactly. Exactly. But I mean, what really matters? Like I had this, I don't know if this answers your question, but this is an experience I'm going to share. In the mornings, I journal. This is one of my practices that I've done since I left that job. And I was journaling, and my cat likes to sit on my lap when I journal.
Oh, wow. And
I'm sitting at like our kitchen table where I would eat. And I'm journaling, and the cat's on my lap, and I'm stroking her face, and she's like blissed out. And it came to my mind, this is happiness. This is happiness. This moment right now with the cat on my lap, and she's so content, and I'm safe in my house, and I'm still in my pajamas, and I have my coffee, and I'm writing in my journal. Like, this is happiness. And I think before I was moving way too fast. Well, first of all, I didn't journal because I was like way too busy. So,
sure.
And it, in that moment of awareness, I was just like, oh, I can have this moment. Like I can just sit here for a few minutes and pet her and enjoy this moment. So I don't know if that's age or just slowing my pace. But I'm so much more like appreciative of those moments. And happiness isn't going to the Oscars. That's exciting. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Happiness is like bonding with my cat and having this quiet moment where I'm just like safe and comfortable. And so I don't know if that's like from getting older. What do you think?
No, I think I very much connect with you on that, because these moments which seem very mundane. Yeah. I mean, that seems nothing extraordinary about it. Of course, going to the Oscars and perhaps winning an Oscar would be something, but it's actually these small mundane moments that you experience something. And I can see now, as you are thinking about that moment, that feeling is there in you right away.
Yes.
So it's these moments that kind of keep charge our lives in a way. They illuminate our lives. These small moments where we experience something which nobody else actually gets because it's something so in the moment. So when you even try and tell it to somebody, many people may not get it. Hey, how could you not be happier when you were on a tropical island holidaying something? But it's these small moments that tend to last, and it's incredible. It's something I think that as one gets older, one starts to feel. And I think that also brings us to thinking and feeling, that differentiation between thoughts and feelings. Because very often we are so much in our head and we forget to feel really. And that moment you were feeling it.
Yes.
You weren't thinking about it.
Right. Yes. But I do want to say, I think that's not just accessible to me because I'm older. I think a young person could be
100%.
aware as long as you're not in a rush, I think it's being in a hurry to like get somewhere and achieve stuff and do stuff. Like that's what makes you likely to miss those moments. If you let yourself just slow down by a beat, then you could you could have those moments. I mean, because like you said, it's a mundane, it's an ordinary thing. She sits there every day generally. And just having that awareness for those few minutes and how happy I feel just telling you about it, why I want to tell you about it, because it was so meaningful and it was so ordinary.
That's so beautiful. So if you met the young Sandy, if you met 6-year-old Sandy, what would you tell her now?
I wish I could do that, right? I would tell her, like, you're already good enough. You don't need to prove it through getting a huge job. Like, you're already good enough. And I would tell her, don't lose your enthusiasm and joy, because that's what you're going to try to get back later after you distracted yourself with the huge job. Yeah, I would tell her that you're already enough, and don't forget that. Like, I think I'm not alone in having that not enough feeling. And one of the things that I really take from my spiritual studies is that sense of enoughness. If we're all pieces of the divine, then we are already totally enough. And yet our culture and ego and everything is like, no, you're not enough unless you drive a Tesla. You know, you're not enough unless you're like 5'10" and 100 pounds. You know, these messages that we all get. So I would want to tell my younger self to just, like, if there's some way to know that, and the carefreeness that you have when you're young, I think you're not as worried about being enough. Like, keep that. That's where the value is. That's where everyone's trying to get, you know?
Absolutely. That is so beautifully put. And that's a wonderful note to end on, Sandy. It was just lovely sharing with you and talking to you. And I hope you keep coming back to Kanha. You're always welcome here.
Thank you so much. I have enjoyed this conversation so much. You can see I'm smiling ear to ear. So thank you.
It's been an absolute joy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of KanhaCast. Please follow and subscribe to KanhaCast on Spotify, YouTube, and Instagram. Until next time, woof woof.